Hello, brothers and sisters. Christ is risen. He truly is risen. I'm sitting here a couple of weeks after Pascha, and I've invited my good friend, Father Jacob Siemens, who knows so much about the things that we cover here on this podcast, The Great Rood Screen. But in addition to being kind of an expert on these things, he's also an expert on the ground, so to speak. So, Father Jacob, where are you a priest?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I am serving in Cardiff, so in the very bottom of Wales, and not far from the English border, but we try to put that out of our mind as much as possible.
As much as possible, yes. And you're within just easy walking or driving distance of St. Tylo's relics, I think.
Walking distance, yeah, they're about
walking
5 to 10 minutes from my house on foot.
That's incredible. That's incredible. We just very briefly covered him or mentioned him really in the St. David of Wales episode, which will have come out a couple of weeks before this interview. So, but I haven't done a full episode on him yet. He's actually probably the one Welsh saint other than St. David whose story I actually know relatively well, and that is because of the writings of Arthur Machen, of all people.
Of course, yes.
Who really liked St. Tylo. So
his story is, I mean, we'll probably talk a little bit more about it, but I mean, it's one of the most adventurous, perhaps, and exciting, I think, of many of the saints' stories, and there are indeed many.
Right. So, what I wanted to invite you to do, we were just saying before we hit record on this episode that the story that I have been telling up till now, of course, began in Wales. Then we went to Ireland and Scotland and England, and kind of doing all those things and kind of following that. You described it to me once as a Fibonacci spiral, and I've never been able to get that out of my head ever since. Obviously, and then recently we finally came back down to Wales for the St. David episode. But obviously, some of my biases are on display here. I know Irish history and stories and legends very well. I know Scottish history and stories and legends very well. I know English history and legends and stuff. And obviously, my background as a Germanic philologist features, anglo-saxon heavily. Welsh, on the other hand, has always been somewhere between, and I'm talking about the language here, a completely uncrackable enigma, and then like verging on like a practical joke. Like, it's just like every time I've ever, and I mean no disrespect to anybody in Wales, every time I've ever sat down and tried to learn a little bit of Welsh, it has been, and of course, like, I've sent you voice messages, and just like, can you pronounce this word for me? Anyway, so Welsh stuff is something that I've only sort of recently been trying to dig into more, both on the Christian side of things and then also on the kind of it's all Christian, but let's say on there's the hagiographical side of things, and then there's the sort of legendary mythical side of things like Arthur. But then there are all these figures, including, for instance, King Arthur's goddaughter or the bard Taliesin, who kind of straddle the line between those two things. And so I've been digging into that a lot more lately. And so what I wanted to do was to invite you to come here and make a pitch for the Welsh Church. And so what I want to talk about is Orthodox Christianity in Wales, then and now. Let's talk about the origins of British Christianity as they begin in Wales, back when the church was one. And then what I would like to do towards the end of this would be to have you talk to us about the mission now, because you're a missionary in Wales, bringing the Orthodox faith back to the people of Wales. And so I'd like to talk to you about that, what that's been like, and kind of, especially some of the exciting things you have going on right now. So where do we begin?
Well, the Welsh Church is, as you've just suggested, ground zero, I think, for Christianity in Britain. But before I even go there, I have to express my sympathy with where you're coming from. I mean, the reason I know anything about the Welsh Church is because I live here.
Yeah.
It isn't something that came to mind naturally. In fact, when I was living in Winnipeg, the city where I grew up, there was a wonderful toy store in the downtown area called Toad Hall Toys. And they
Love
had
that.
a wonderful book section that included myths and legends from all over Northwestern Europe. And I was an Irish obsessive at the time. And I remember seeing a children's version of the Mabinogion on their shelves. And I thought to myself, I picked it up, looked at it, and immediately put it back because everything seemed so unpronounceable and, frankly, too obscure to fit into the little closet of interests I had carved out. And so the Welsh Church really is something I've had to get my head around simply by virtue of living here on the ground. And it's that has brought me to the point of understanding it more richly and as something I've just described as ground zero.
Yeah.
We couldn't say that with complete strictness, in the sense that it is likely the Irish Church had a separate but closely related foundation, from, for example, by the 4th century, in any case, Egypt. But if you look at the Welsh Church and assume that residing in it is this seed that was planted even earlier, then you'll understand sort of its importance in this whole picture. You mentioned the Fibonacci spiral. I'm glad it's stuck in your head. Long may it do so. But for anybody listening to this, I would say, yes, think about the village just west of Cardiff called Llaneltedfawr, which is sometimes nicknamed the University of the Atlantic, because of its prominence as a place of learning and a place where, monastic community gathered and studied and praised God. But in many ways, it is a place that gave rise to the incredible saintly and intellectual tradition that would come to represent the Welsh Church. But we need to almost start earlier, because when you look just across the border into Somerset and think of Glastonbury, I'm sure most people have heard of it. You're talking about a place that, according to legend, is now home to the earthly remains of Saint Joseph of Arimathea,
Right.
and the miraculous staff which he planted in the ground and became the Glastonbury thorn, as well as the earthly resting place of King Arthur. That history is not really to be divorced. It would be artificially divorced if we did so from the Welsh story, because for one thing, it's not far away geographically, but it's also a story with which there is so much overlap between the early Welsh Church and itself. And so we can really start there, not least because St. Joseph of Arimathea, who is reputed to have been one of the apostolic missionaries to the British Isles, was quickly succeeded by a saint we do venerate as the first bishop in Wales, and that is Aristobulus, who was one of the 70 and is said by many to have actually reposed in Wales.
This is something that I haven't actually mentioned Saint Aristobulus on the podcast yet, but there are very, very ancient accounts in the Orthodox Church preserved on Mount Athos today that say that he was sent as an apostolic missionary. I mean, he's one of the 70, but that he was sent as an apostolic missionary to Britain after the resurrection.
See, this kind of thing I know you had told me before about this Athonite tradition, but I find it so surprising and so exciting because, prior to even knowing his name, my perception of Britain is that it might have received the faith by the, say, late 4th century at the earliest. The first British name most of us learn is actually that of Pelagius, the heresiarch.
Yeah.
And but working back from him, backward, for him to have had enough sort of credibility to move to the continent as a monk and to have gained the reputation he did, he had to have come from a tradition,
some kind of stock, yeah.
Which means there was something there before him, which already takes us back, let's say even conservatively, by 40 years, before his own time. And that means we're talking about mid-4th century. But in addition to that, we've got the, we've got this earlier witness. So, for example, Tertullian's comments, and I always get the precise words wrong, so I'll paraphrase as best I can. But as early as the early 3rd century, so the early 200s, he talks about the Britons who had received Christ, or who knew Christ without Rome. Now, what does that mean? It means that within 200 years, within really 150-ish years of the ascension of the Lord, a North African Christian who's never seen the shores of Britain is able to talk about these Christians in the far, far northwest. And it does suggest that if we are to take his words and the words of other witnesses seriously, we can actually go beyond the textual evidence and say that Christianity's been here almost since the beginning.
Yeah.
And if we take that, then we can look at a place like the aforementioned Llaneltyd and see in it the fruits of something that actually had been planted and grew up, already had 200 years of growth behind it. So the Welsh story is really fundamental to Britain, and fundamental, I would go further and say, to all of Northwestern European Christianity.
Can you tell us something about the character of early Christianity in Wales, at least so far as we know it? We talked about, this is a great monastic foundation / university, a long time before that idea was a gleam, in the eyes of the Paris divines, right?
Yeah. The first thing I will say about it is that untangling it becomes like trying to identify individual threads on a spider web. It really is difficult. There is an inherent challenge in trying to sort of untangle the stories of this saint or that Christian settlement from those of another area. Having said that, in terms of what it looked like, it would not have been far off what we have more evidence for, and that is the Irish settlement. So, for example, the kinds of the aesthetic residue is similar. The kinds of Celtic motifs that we imagine when we think of even something as late as the Book of Kells, those kinds of motifs are in use by the Britons as they inhabit Wales at the time. And I imagine you'd be able to find, archaeological remains like them across what is today England, because, of course, these are all Brythonic tribes. That said, when we look at the lives of the Welsh saints, so you've mentioned St. Tylo. We talked about Llaneltyd, which is named, his name is embedded in it, but that is St. Eltyd. You are looking at saints whose monasticism and whose lives of faith are similar in the sense that, on one hand, they're at the center of communities, On the other hand, they're also, they have aspects of the hermit to the way they go about their Christian faith. They are seen perhaps, and I use this analogy sort of loosely, but as holy fools in the sense of being on the periphery of communities, but not far detached from them. So this summer we're going to go to Skellig Michael, and that is a place characterized by its isolation. You don't get that same kind of isolation here. So as you head into North Wales and you look at what is called the island of 20,000 saints, the Bardsey Island just south of Anglesey, that's fairly easy to reach. I mean, you can see it from the mainland, so to speak, and so it's both integrated and also peripheral at exactly the same time. And Wales then and now is very much shaped by its topography. So Cardiff sits at the base of the valleys. And the valleys, while most contemporary Welsh people think of them as a place of social deprivation because of the change in industry over the last 100 years, the valleys are physically breathtaking for their, in terms of their beauty, but they also shaped how people settled. So you have essentially strips of inhabited by clans, and that is the case even today. So one of the jokes around Wales is that, of course, Jones is the most common surname. You get Phillips, Evans, and a handful of others. This isn't because it was a small gene pool. It's because essentially these names are geographically based. And in that respect, I'll tell a story that seems irrelevant perhaps, but about 10 years ago, maybe longer, 15 years ago, I had gone up to to Mid Wales to go mountain biking. And I was staying in a farmer's converted barn. And he was explaining, because he had moved into Wales from England, that all of the farmers in that area would help each other out. But because they were all named David Jones, they didn't go by their surnames. They went to David of, and then some descriptor of their farm, which is just wonderful, but very telling in terms of how the people have settled, stayed, and made this land their own. And so the Christianity here would follow those kinds of patterns.
So maybe you could tell us, since you live so close to him, could you tell us a little bit about Saint Tylo? A lot of people really who have been enjoying this podcast enjoy it specifically for the saint stories. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about Saint Tylo, or Tylo. Maybe I've been saying his name wrong, by the way.
Probably, but I'm not going to correct you.
I found a couple of different. The thing is, like, I found a couple of different guides online about how to say some of these Welsh names, and they don't always agree with each other, which I found to be the case, by the way, when we were in Scotland last year. I kept tripping over the name of Saint Mungo's mother, Thenu or Theneva or Enoch or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, some dear old lady at the parish there explained to me that those are all correct.
Right.
And I was like, oh, sure. Okay. Don't know how this. Well,
I have to say that trying to pronounce Welsh has got me into some hot water when I've stood in front of students and mispronounced some place. And I've been I've been corrected without hesitation. So
good.
It's something that's really been.
I always appreciate it when people correct me, because somebody put it to me once, like, if you're embarrassed when somebody corrects you, it means that your ego is more important than the truth. And that's always kind of stuck with me. So anyway, I'm always appreciative. So anyway, Saint Tylo, you're the person on the ground, so we're going to assume that's the right way to say it. Can you just tell us a little bit about him?
Yes, 6th century, and difficult to pin down because his life was characterized by almost constant movement. He and Saint Pattern and Saint David went off to Jerusalem, where they were ordained bishops by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and they returned. Now, I'm going to pause there. I'm not going to get very far in this story, I have to say, but I have to pause there because once again, it underscores the incredible links between British Christianity and the Near East, skipping, as Tertullian said, over Rome. Of course, you get threads of faith coming up through Gaul, modern-day France, into Britain that way, but something is happening. There's constant sort of intercourse between Wales and the Near East. That said, the three of them go off to Jerusalem, where they are ordained bishops, and then return to Wales. Tylo is essentially fostered to become the bishop of Llandaff, which is you might say, the foundation of the modern city of Cardiff. It still is a city in its own right today, although it looks like just a semi-urban part of the greater city. He's in Llandaff, and at some point, a plague begins sort of moving its way through the island. And so he flees with some monks and stops in Cornwall, stops, I believe, on the Isles of Scilly, before going down to Brittany, where he meets up with his old friend Samson, another Near Eastern link, incidentally. But it's when he's staying with Samson in Brittany, specifically at Dol, he is called upon by King Budic II, who is either brother-in-law of King Arthur or a cousin, some kind of direct relative in any case. And because Budic's kingdom, modern-day Brittany, is being affected by a dragon, Budic asks Tylo to expel the dragon from the area. And Tylo does so successfully, chaining him to a rock in the sea, whence he is seen no more. So Tylo has dragon fighting abilities, and it's a wonderful story. In fact, while he's in Brittany, he and his fellow saint and Bishop of Dol, Samson, plant an orchard, which is extant even today. And for those who grew up reading the Asterix comics, they will appreciate knowing that one of the most magnificent menhirs stands just on the outside of Dol. So it's an incredible place, and his name, actually, St. Tylo's name, is used as the basis for a number of place names in Brittany, as it is, of course, here in Wales. But he returns.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, to kind of underscore that connection, it's almost a specifically Jerusalem connection, or a specifically Semitic connection that you find in early Welsh Christianity, that you see even in the names of the saints. Obviously, David, but also Tylo is. There's a few different theories about this, but it seems to be a Welsh rendering of the Hebrew name Eliud.
Yes,
it's one of the yeah.
I've read that as well, and of course you get Saint Samson, you get Aaron,
right.
You get. One of the proto-martyrs of Britain is Saint Aaron, who loses his life at Caerleon, which is a Roman fort just east of here. So it's a place that, God willing, you will get to yourself, and where we might sing a troparion or two. But yeah, the names run through the Welsh Christian tradition, and they're all drawn from that sort of Semitic foundation.
So I have another question about this, but I want you to finish Tylo's story first, and then I'll ask you another question.
Well, what else can I say? He returns to Wales, and he lives out his life as somebody, as a bishop who is both loved and significant. He establishes uh, at least two monastic foundations. There is Tylo, which is further west from here, but also, of course, Llandaff itself. And at his death, his relics seem to be popular. And he is, there are a few places in Wales that claim them, but the skull is on available for veneration at Llandaff Cathedral, a place where we have ourselves obviously gone and venerated. But in terms of details, and I always found this difficult because I had tried to do a podcast on this very question before. Oftentimes I find, because I'm not a natural storyteller, I'm having to fill in details and to do so venturing into the realm of the entirely speculative. And Tylo's life is really something that is in no need or in very little need of embellishment. It really is just his travels and his monastic example
Right.
is phenomenal.
The approach that we have tried to take on this podcast is a very credulous approach. And reading from reading the lives of these saints from what a friend of mine once called a position of high credulity. So if you read in the Venerable Bede that Saint Peter shows up and flogs Saint Augustine of Canterbury, to keep him, in a dream, to keep him from turning back from his mission, then you just assume that's what actually happened, right? And so I've tried to do the same sort of thing here as I present the hagiography. Obviously, I'm not part of a religion in which the idea of the fantastical or miraculous is a problem. And I think that this is one of the things that, as so much of this stuff, and I've spent, as part of my work on this podcast and some other related projects that you and I are involved in together, spent a lot of time translating original sources. And for the longest time, many of these original sources have just been the province of academics who have done a great job of preserving the text as text, but who are very often, I don't want to say never, but are very often not approaching them from the perspective of maybe this is a thing that actually happened to real people. So I've been trying to sort of merge the scholarly approach in the terms of having good primary sources with a more credulous approach to the lives of the saints.
Look, that's something I think is profoundly important and will actually facilitate anybody's engagement, not only with the stories that you've covered so far in the podcast, but also and especially with respect to the Welsh Church, because if we have an island of 20,000 saints and that doesn't even touch on the rest of the country, we're talking about a lot of stories. And so many of them involve miraculous wells and, other such signs. And if you approach these stories, from a merely academic point of view, you are bound to miss their significance. And I speak from experience. It's something that I think needs a correct, I'm going to sound academic here for a moment, but an improved historiography, a really Christian historiography, one that actually reads the stories for the the empirical fact, but also that accepts a worldview that is replete with the miraculous. And that goes for somebody like, the story of Saint Non, who is the mother of Saint David, a story you're probably familiar with. But when you go to Saint Non's well, which is still flowing with water, you can do so, with skepticism. And this
is the place where she gave birth to Saint David, right.
Yeah. And
I'm glad to know it's still there. We just covered this in our Saint David episode, a couple of episodes before this. this interview comes out. And I said, I don't know if it's still there, but I hope to go and find out someday soon. So.
Well, yes, make that someday very soon, because it is there, and it's ready to welcome you. But the well is just an incredible thing to experience. The first, say, 2 or 3 times I went, I was still very much immersed in my own academic work, and I believed that it was significant in an intellectual way. But it took going there in a new light for me to sort of melt, for me to drop those defenses and just accept, what had happened. And when you do that, I can only, I can't express strongly enough how enriching that is, and how much more true it is to the whole spiritual trajectory from the moment of Pentecost through to, our lives today.
There really is a different approach to miracles and the miraculous in the, and I would say also to relics, right? In the, let's say the more Semitic or Syrian or Palestinian tradition. Obviously, I'm thinking of lots of works, including those attributed to Saint Ephrem the Syrian. There was something from the Cave of Wonders, which is a work that's attributed to Saint Ephrem the Syrian, but it draws on older Jewish midrashes on the life of Adam and Eve and things like this. And so I in a fit of just a total lack of discernment on my part, I tweeted something on, I guess it's X now, but I don't know I don't know what the verbal form of that is. Did I zeet something? Anyway, I don't know. So I posted something on X about this, this very ancient Christian and prior to that Jewish legend, that the reason that Lucifer fell was because he refused to venerate Adam. When God was bringing all creation before Adam, he refused to venerate Adam. And of course, a bunch of people very angrily responded, "Oh, that's just Islam. Like, no Christian has ever taught that." I was like, Saint Ephrem the Syrian, was it like, where do you think Islam got this stuff? They didn't invent most of what they believe. But in any case, if you read in these traditions, there's a huge focus on relics and a huge focus on this sort of like the idea of the chain of transmission, the idea of succession. Obviously, in the church we have apostolic succession, but in the Welsh tradition, this chain of transmission, this chain of succession, in the ancient Syrian and ancient Semitic tradition, is also things like the priesthood that passed from Adam to Melchizedek and from Melchizedek to Christ. And you have the same kind of thing in Ethiopia, right, where you have the idea of the pearl that passes from Adam, but then the pearl is actually the Theotokos, and so that's the culmination of the human race. These are all really beautiful ideas, and I have noticed, because these are kind of my two spheres of attention right now. I've noticed way more parity between, let's say, like the Syrian hagiography and legendary material in the Christian tradition, and then the early British, let's say British and Irish stuff, like way more parity. I don't know how to express it, except to say they have a very similar flavor, which a lot of things in the middle do not have. And so that seems to me, at least on a sort of a vibe check level, to confirm that there was some kind of really ancient connection back to Jerusalem, back to Palestine, back to the sort of the Semitic roots of the faith, which is preserved, which had an early influence. I won't say preserved, we'll talk about that in a moment, but at least had an early influence on the British church, that you see showing up in place names, you see it showing up in personal names, but you also see it showing up in the kind of quality of the hagiography and the legends and the relics and all these different things. Let me put it this way. I can't imagine King Arthur emerging in Italy, although people in Italy love to tell King Arthur stories. But if King Arthur had emerged in Jerusalem, I wouldn't be a bit surprised, if that makes any kind of sense at all. I don't know.
It certainly does to me.
Now, Arthur Machen, to mention him again, an author I like very much. he talks when he writes about the history of Christianity in Wales. He talks about the three great plagues that devastated the Welsh church. There was the Yellow Plague, which is probably the plague of Justinian. That is, an actual plague that swept the entire empire and massively wiped out huge portions of the population of Europe. Then followed by the Red Plague of Rome. This was the sort of from Arthur Macken's perspective anyway, the obliteration of the local traditions in favor of the Roman tradition, and then the Black Plague of Geneva. So you're standing there. I'm not going to get into a whole thing. Obviously, I believe St. Augustine of Canterbury was a saint. I'm not going to get into a whole thing about Whitby now. We've already done a video about that. But I do want to kind of address this question of the sometimes accidental erosion and sometimes deliberate obliteration of ancient Christianity within Wales. And then what is it like for you now as a representative of the Orthodox faith in Wales, in very much a missionary posture with all of that history behind you?
Let's go back to the 7th century and look at the encounter between sort of this Celtic Christian tradition and the Latin tradition as it was communicated through the Anglo-Saxon mission. There is much that is said about the Anglo-Saxon tradition being triumphant, as if they were in conflict. Now, of course, in some respects they were, and you're right. Of course, we did talk about this in a video, but
at Whitby.
Yes, indeed, and that was a rather enjoyable one. Yeah. But it would be wrong to say or to think even for a moment that somehow it was a complete annihilation as opposed to a cross-fertilization. So we went into, was it Ripon Cathedral? I can't remember. I think yes. Was it Ripon? Yes. Mm-hmm. And where is it that we saw the bishop's chair?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It wasn't there. It was at why are you putting me on the spot like this? It was after Durham. I don't know. I'll think of it in a moment. Probably
well, I'm glad you will, because I put myself on the spot.
Probably when it's too late and no longer relevant.
That's right. But we looked at that chair, and I pointed out in the small video that emerged from that visit that the motifs carved into the arms were.
No, it wasn't Eskim. It wasn't
Eskim.
It wasn't Eskim. It was Hexham. Was it Hexham?
I don't think we got to Hexham.
Yeah, we did.
No.
Ah, my gosh.
It's okay. It'll come back.
I'm just saying names now. I thought for sure, because I know that I wrote up a bunch of notes on Hexham.
And you ended up conversing with that woman who was an expert in those panels.
No. We did go to Hexham. I have a video right here. Hexham Cathedral Church Interior video really? That we took. Yeah, and that's where the Fristool was. See, I found it in our production notes. So yes, it was at Hexham.
Well done. All right. I can't believe I couldn't remember that.
I've got the receipts.
So, but of course, in the arms of that chair are the visual, are the very visual sort of motifs that underscore the connection between the pre and post Whitby Church. That is the church of the Anglo-Saxons and the church of the Celts. And of course, you look at the Lindisfarne Gospels. That is what 100 to 150 years later than the mission begins. Well, it's no accident. It looks the way it does. Of course, it incorporates other artistic imagery, other artistic techniques, but to the untrained eye, mm-hmm. It also could be mistaken for something, like the Book of Kells. And it's precisely that, for example, is not possessed by, the churches of the continent, not in the same way. So I think what it does is to become something more of a marriage than a conflict that ends up in triumph for one side and complete loss for the other. I would take that a bit further, though, and say I was delivering a lecture sometime at the midway point in my doctoral work, and it was on the legacy of Saint Theodore of Tarsus, of course, one of the great, mid 7th to the end of the 7th century representatives of that Anglo-Saxon mission, albeit an Easterner himself. And when I got to the end of the lecture, I got the very question I dreaded. Somebody in the audience said, "How does that relate to Wales?" And I didn't have a clear answer because it was not clear what kind of influence Canterbury had over the Welsh Church. It still isn't.
Yeah.
And so the first time it wasn't the first time I met him, but it was we had lunch at his home, and that is a retired Archbishop of Canterbury. And I said to him afterward, okay, I have a question for you. What was the relationship between Canterbury and Wales from the 7th century on? And he paused, and he got a very big and mischievous grin on his face. He goes, "I don't know." The point being that, this is coming from a scholar.
It's always a good scholar, by the way, who can say, "I don't know."
And it's something that he was quite willing to admit, because there is ambiguity. Why would there be ambiguity if a church is utterly triumphant and holding sway entirely over the rest of the island?
I know that there was, for instance, when the 10th century life of St. David is being written, it's probably because they are trying to make an argument for a Welsh primacy, or at least an independent Welsh church, basically to have St. David's recognized as a metropolitan see. So there does seem to be some of that going on. Of course, that's like 3 centuries later, though.
Yeah, and you see that. I mean, is it Geoffrey of Monmouth's history? Not history, but his records of journeying through Wales. No, it's not Geoffrey. In any case, that is another name I will have to fish for in my mind as I'm talking. But the point is that, yes, that is very much a feature of the medieval Welsh Church, because
and which is directly connected with it's not specific to the church, right? It's directly connected to the relationship between England and Wales. Famously, of course, Wales being an Old English word for foreigners.
Yes.
The joke being that only the English can make you feel like a foreigner in your own country.
Something apparently they're still able to do.
Yeah, something. So tell me, all right, so casting forward a little bit, you have the Protestant Reformation. What does that look like in Wales as opposed to other places in the British Isles?
By the late Middle Ages, you have a very strong Cistercian monasticism around Wales. And so many of the abbeys here that you see in ruins today, like Llantoni Abbey and even, of course, the famous Tintern Abbey, are Cistercian foundations. And so clearly there's this strong, monastic movement within the wider church. But of course, the Cistercian style of monasticism is quite distinct to what had come before it by so many centuries. And otherwise, you simply have, it's a very rural church. In Wales to this day, I mean, our cities are new. They're not new in terms of their histories, but they're new in terms of their status as cities. St. David's is a city because it's home to a cathedral, not because it has any people in it. I mean, it's a few hundred, maybe. The point being that that's really the face of Wales from north to south and east to west. It is a very rural, it's a very rural place. And you can see that in the parish churches that are, built at so many mile intervals. And these churches are relatively small. They're relatively, we would consider them quite humble. There is a reconstructed, and not out of somebody's imagination, but literally, as in removed stone by stone meticulously from the countryside where it was essentially disintegrating, right near me, a church called St. Tylo's. And with the help of scholars who were able to identify the paintings underneath the whitewash, it was completely redone as it
I've
had
seen
been.
pictures of this, yeah.
It is magnificent. And
suspiciously Orthodox, too.
There you go. And exactly. Now, whether that was particularly British compared to whether that was particularly Welsh compared to what you might find in England, I don't know. I don't think so. But it is sort of a testament to the fact that it was very much a rich faith aesthetically and in terms of the way people practiced. The communities would not have been, a liturgical celebration would not have involved hundreds of people. That's part of that sort of myth of, everybody attending church in the Middle Ages. And by the time you get then to the Reformation, this is all stripped back. Great violence is done to the ecclesiastical culture of the land. And Wales ends up sort of succumbing to that legacy, because you get the succeeding centuries where Wales is hardly given a look in until, of course, the rise of Wesley and Wesleyanism that ends up having a substantial impact in Wales because of its industrial, its mining and, the other industries.
But a very kind of unique version of Wesleyanism, which I know that there's a sort of a Calvinist Methodism which takes place in Wales. Am I right about that? Which is very unusual.
You are.
That doesn't happen other places, as far as I know.
That's right. The story goes that there was a deal struck, essentially, so that half of Wales is Wesleyan Methodist and half of Wales is Calvinist Methodist.
So that's the Black Plague of Geneva that Machen was talking about.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And you can see its legacy, because this is, as a Canadian expat, I struggled when we first moved to Britain. We were living in Manchester, and I found it, despite having traveled here as a young person a few times, and despite the culture of my own home in Canada, I found it culturally really quite unnerving. It was just not, yes, we speak the same language, but beyond that, there was so much to overcome and so much to get used to. And I didn't feel entirely welcome when we first moved there. When, however, 2.5 years later, we moved down to Wales, it was a completely different story. The reason being, I think, because of the people, and that can sound like a travel brochure cliche, but it really made a difference. And when I look at my family now, I've got 4 kids born in Wales, and they just think of themselves as Welsh.
Yeah.
Why is that possible? Because we adopted this country adopted us. And yes, my accent will always make me stick out like a sore thumb, but I've encouraged Welsh language learning among my kids. My wife is really quite adept now. She studied it for years, and I think that is both indicative of the possibilities in Wales, as well as suggestive of the kind of people that are here. And all of that is to say, it's despite the disintegration that Machen would be talking about, and that you see with the chapel tradition as it grows up. Because the Welsh are, according to various census results, the least believing people in the British Isles. And yet, that is not evidenced by some kind of decline of Welsh life. Welsh life is still quite strong. It's a very communal place. Come here on a Rugby International Day, and Cardiff is a giant celebration, and one in which you don't feel intimidated. That's a wonderful thing. You've got the Welsh choral tradition, and I have a parishioner himself from the valleys who although in his 20s, sings with a male voice choir. Now, this is, to me, marvelous because it attests to that kind of grassroots, the living grassroots tradition that abides despite, living in the world we do. So, on one hand, chapel kind of gets in the way of the kind of Christianity that the Welsh were accustomed to from antiquity. But there is also something of the Welsh spirit that is preserved through it. And that's what we're able to seize upon in the present.
So that brings us to kind of the final thing I wanted to ask you for this interview. And I appreciate you sticking on with me as long as you have. What is it like? What are the opportunities? What are the obstacles when it comes to you're bringing something back from the East, ultimately, back from Jerusalem? But it's, of course, it's being mediated through kind of a Russian idiom. You serve in what's the name now? It's the Archdiocese.
Brace yourself. It's the Archdiocese of Orthodox Churches of Russian tradition in Western Europe.
There you go. The Rue de Rue, as we usually prefer to call it, because it's just easier to say. So what is it like doing that? How have the Welsh people under your pastoral care and the people that you've tried to minister to, how have they taken on and accepted the faith of their own? To what extent have they done that? And how what do you think the future of Orthodoxy in Wales looks like?
I'll start with the last question. The future of Orthodoxy in Wales is bright indeed. And I'm not saying that, motivated by some naive optimism. I really believe that. I'll say more about the why in a moment. The fact is, I, as you know, had been a uniate for about 15 years and served as a priest in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Made no headway. And I know that there are good reasons for that. But when I was finally received into the place I should have always been, into the Orthodox Church, this mission took on a life of its own. So some people came across with us, with myself and my family, but the fact is that core has long since been surpassed. And the people that have joined have largely been, in fact, by vast majority, Welsh people who come from either no faith at all or have, come over from some sort of nominal Christian profession. And one of the reasons they've done that is because of the way we've sought to embrace Welsh orthodoxy, i.e. ancient Welsh Christianity. I don't mean that as some sort of affectation, but rather simply by recognizing our saints, by using Welsh in the liturgy, by saying this is important, by acknowledging the fact that a Christianity that does not become indigenous is not an authentic Christianity. It's you have to be truly incarnational. And we are seeking to be truly incarnational in a place where the incarnation has been known for a very long time. So by drawing on that as our source, I think it has empowered us to be present with and for people who are on the lookout. And so they've come through the doors and they've found a ready welcome. But again, not a ready welcome such as we might imagine from, church in 1979 when it was a matter of the usher being nice to the person who walked through the door, but rather a sense that, well, the Welsh have a word, hiraeth, a sense of coming home.
Yes.
And,
It's the
I think
only Welsh word that I can say.
it's such a lovely one. But
So
once you're over
beautiful.
here, you'll have to get to know a few others. We'll have a glossary ready for you.
Sounds good.
But yeah, it's. I think it is a sense of hiraeth. I think it's a matter of coming through the door and knowing that actually there's something authentic to this. There's something that really belongs to them.
I think that, if you believe, as I do, and as I know you do, that the Orthodox Christian faith is the faith that was once delivered to the saints. If you believe that our roots always go back to Jerusalem as Christians, no matter where you live in the world or what your people are, what their history is, that your roots always go back to Jerusalem. If you believe that actually something that same former Archbishop of Canterbury you mentioned, something he wrote once about Saint Seraphim of Sarov, my patron saint, was to say that if you wanted to know the answer to the question of what it would look like for someone to be totally transparent to Jesus Christ in a time and place far removed from first century Palestine, then Saint Seraphim of Sarov would have to be part of the answer. I think it's a direct quote. And I think that, in the Welsh saints, we have amazing apostolic figures of who answer this question of what it would look like to be totally transparent to Jesus Christ. When you read about some of the incredible things associated with Saint Tylo and Saint David and so on, that is what you're really seeing is the power of Christ working in and through them. In the particular place and time and context where they were planted. So I think, I think there is a sense of homecoming for all of us. I mean, I certainly experienced it when I walked into an Orthodox liturgy for the first time in Dallas, Texas, of all places, a place that has not known the gospel nearly as long as Wales has. And yet when I walked in, I knew, this is the place that I belong. This is home. So. Well, Father, how can people find out more about the work you're doing over there? Where can they follow you online, and how can they support the work of your mission? By the way, you just got a beautiful new temple. Maybe you could just tell us very quickly about that. I know you've made some videos about it, so let's also direct people to your YouTube channel.
Right. The YouTube channel is Orthodox Exchange, and that's the tagline that I've used to guide people into the work that I'm seeking to do. Having said that, most important, I think, in all of it is this new temple. We were, by the grace of God, able to purchase a 200-year-old building in a place called Abercarn. And Abercarn is just between Cardiff and Newport, up the A467 for those in Britain that are going to go looking for it. And it is the most blessed place. I still have to pinch myself to remind myself that it's real. It is, as an historic church, it's nestled in the woods, and it's in a place that has garnered the nickname Little Switzerland because it's very, very hilly and covered in trees. And it's just glorious. It was built to be a chapel for those Calvinist. No, I think it was actually Presbyterians. I'm sorry, I was going to say Calvinist Methodists, but it was, I think, Presbyterians. That said, they had it, and then they handed it over to the church in Wales, the Anglicans, for use, and they used it up until I don't know how many years ago, but it has been empty for a while. And it is perfectly suited to Orthodox worship. It's a place that we're just now waiting to get the keys for, because it's I've been in a few times already, but the conveyancing is still going through. So I don't know what the lawyers are doing. That said, as soon as it is open, we will be celebrating. We will have a lot of work to do. And I don't know if this is the appropriate place for a plug, but if people are able, I think that we could do with support from listeners around the world. And I don't say that because we're looking to make some kind of profit. I'm saying it because I really think that this is an opportunity for orthodoxy to shine like the star it is among the people of South Wales. We are building on a legacy of orthodoxy in Wales that even skipping over the hundreds of years of apparent absence has been building over the last 50 years at the hands of a rather saintly, now departed priest named Father Barnabas and his protege, Father Daniel, who is still working alive and well and vibrant up in Blaenau in North Wales. The Greeks have a vibrant parish here in Cardiff. There are other Orthodox churches as well. But our opportunity with the Abercorn Church is one that I think really stands out among even the other communities because of it, not only its possibilities, but because of where it is, because of the way in which we both have already and intend to continue embracing the Welsh saints very deliberately. And I just think that, if people want to see, an example of continuity between the faith as it was and the faith as it is, then they could do worse than by coming to visit us here. So, news for it has largely been put out through the YouTube channel Orthodox Exchange, but obviously I'm going through a complete revamp of our website, which is simply orthodoxcardiff.com, and so we will have more up on that in the very near future. And otherwise, they can just look me up through Orthodox Exchange and perhaps other places to find out more. But anything that people can do would be most appreciated, because it's something that, even if you're in Australia and listening to this, you can definitely have a part in, because we would not have the church if it wasn't for the incredible generosity of an American donor who simply heard about our need and stepped in and very rapidly saw us go from having no possibility to actually having ownership. So it's an incredible story, and one that I'm very happy to share.
I will encourage people to please, if you're able, support the work of Father Jacob, of Bishop Augustine up in Glasgow, and the whole sort of work that your Archdiocese is now doing in the British Isles to bring people the Orthodox faith in their own language, venerating their own local saints. We're going to hopefully have some exciting ways that listeners of this podcast can actually be involved in supporting the mission very soon, but I don't want to announce those prematurely. So what I'll just say is, for now, please consider going and supporting Father Jacob's mission. I think that the reason this podcast has resonated with so many people, I mean, it's not a huge channel, but it's doing really well for a new channel. And I've certainly met lots of people in my travels over the course of the last few months who have mentioned this project specifically and how much it has delighted and helped them. There is, this thing that we feel in America constantly, where we feel like we're a little cut off from our own roots and cut off from our own sources. And for Orthodox Christians, people coming back to the apostolic faith, to also be reconnected with their own ancient saints is, I think, really, really special. And
can I
if you
jump in there, actually?
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry to break your train of thought, but what you've just said is something that I want to impress on New World listeners in the United States, in my own Canada, it is that you might feel apart from, this more ancient expression, but nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, yours and my conversations when you were over here and we were in Scotland and talking about whiskey and talking about all of these sort of this passing on and development of tradition
Mm-hmm.
is exciting, but it has real implications for us, because you might be in a parish in Nebraska, but you are connected with us here in Wales, and vice versa. We take energy from the things that you are doing, and it helps us get on with our mission. And I hope that anything that you hear then coming out of our part of the world is feeding back to you. So there is a real reciprocity, and I would love to think that people are encouraged by that.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, Father Jacob, thank you so much. Christ is risen. How do you say that in
Indeed, he is
Welsh?
risen.
Can you teach us? How to say that in Welsh?
Most of my parishioners can, but you've put
Put you
me
on the spot. Okay, all right, that's all right. Well, Christ is risen. Indeed, he's risen. And thank you so much. This will not be the last time we invite you over here to do this. Very soon in the story which I am telling, it'll be time to talk about St. Theodore of Tarsus. So hopefully you'll join us again for that. So
I look forward to it, and I thank you very much.
all right. Thanks, Father. Goodbye, everyone. You have been listening to The Great Rood Screen, the story of men and women who sought the kingdom of heaven in the mists of the British Isles. I'm Deacon Seraphim Richard Rohlin, and this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.